Summer. How are you?
I am good. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. Last month was great being able to launch and share Big Break Foundation. For those who were not able to see our episode, just a little bit about Big Break Foundation. Our mission is to shatter systemic barriers within the location-based experience industry. And with our channel here on Themed Entertainment TV, we want to use this platform to be able to amplify and enlighten on the different stories and experiences within this industry and have some really interesting and sometimes tough conversations that will lead to awareness and action.
Yes. And we're here to do it one more time. This is episode 2.
Episode 2, I'm super excited. With it being Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month. And I really want to go into the awareness a little bit more later and really push towards acceptance and action, which is really important in any of these conversations. So just really excited for our guests, Krystyl and Marieke. Just in the production meeting Summer, it was so exciting chatting with them.
It really, really was. But before we get into that awesome conversation, should we have an unfiltered moment?
Yes. So with today being Cinco de Mayo, happy Cinco de Mayo, everyone. We wanted to talk a little bit about Cinco de Mayo. I know I've celebrated Cinco de Mayo with friends and families, but in the conversation, it's interesting when talking to people a lot, there's a misconception that Cinco de Mayo is the Mexican Independence Day, and that's the reason why we celebrate it. But in actuality, only 22% of Americans know what Cinco de Mayo is actually about. And Summer, we've had this conversation being tequila sisters and chatting about our love there. Exactly. But really, in actuality, Cinco de Mayo celebrates the first battle of Puebla in between the French and the Mexicans. And it's pretty low key within the Mexican culture. So it's interesting.
How commercialized.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. How commercialized we as Americans can be at times, and especially businesses, right? Mm-hmm. I saw some articles for, popular chains, and then you look at who their executive leadership is, and it's not reflective of their brand. And then even more so, these individuals, 364 days of the year, are supporting policy and administration to keep Mexicans and immigrants out of the United States.
You're absolutely right. So we just say, remember, if yesterday and tomorrow you are all about building a wall, that on Cinco de Mayo today, you also remember those ideas, and you can't bathe in the culture and then be negative about it the next day. So just be mindful. That's all we're saying in this unfiltered moment. But with that, we've got an exciting conversation that needs to be had right now. And so with that, I am going to actually step back. I wish you a great show. And let's get into this conversation. See you on the other side.
See ya. Thank you for all you do, Summer. Well, as Summer said, we have a great show for you all. Once again, celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month and Mental Health Awareness Month. So without further ado, I want to bring on our 2 guests. Our first one, Krystyl Wright. She is a psychotherapist, and she describes herself as a behaviorist to get you to the life that you deserve. I love that sentiment. And then we have Marieke Van Der Maelen, incredible themed entertainment professional and educator within the space, performer, creator, designer, to really unpack some of the stigma and the culture behind Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage, and chatting a little bit more with the intersection of mental health. And then we're going to end it with an exercise on capacity of joy and practicing. So let's go ahead and bring in our guest. Hello and welcome.
Hello. How are you?
So much.
Great. I just want to let everybody know, full transparency, we were having some connectivity issues. So we apologize if you experienced that, but hopefully that won't interfere with the conversation. So hello, ladies. Welcome.
Hey, Monet. How's it going? Hey, Krystyl.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good.
Great.
Good.
So let's go ahead and dive into our conversation a little bit and see kind of where we go. I know in the production meeting, there's just so many different aspects of culture and mental health and where they intersect. But I want to really start with you, Marieke, and sharing with us a little bit more about Asian American culture. And then we can start talking more in regards to stigma and mental health.
Sure. I think just to give people a background on myself, I'm a transracial adoptee. I tell people that I was born in Korea, but I was made in America. And there have been an awful lot of conversations. So most of my life has been spent working in social justice and combining that with live entertainment, counter narratives, and then going back into the schools now, extending a hand backward, going into the schools and talking to young people all over the country now about their experiences, their hopes, their concerns, and their family stories, and collecting those in addition to the stories that I had in my neighborhood back in Chicago. I'm from 60626, so second most diverse zip code, second to Queens, New York. Over 40 languages spoken there, over 80 countries plus represented, but collecting again those stories and hearing the different stories that have made up the fabric of America and what has made us truly fantastic, in spite of whatever said this past year. We are great. And we're great because of all the different voices and all the different experiences here.
Absolutely, and definitely agree, and that's why you're here today. I was introduced to you through the Creative Quest Foundation, and what an exciting opportunity, and just an example of how coming together and what we can do together to really push the narrative forward towards equity. So can you talk a little bit more in regards to generational stigma within the Asian American culture, and then we can dissect that a little bit more in mental health and other cultures?
Sure. I mean, I can, and I think it's funny. And again, I'm saying that I'm transracial, and I know how that term has changed over the years, and depending on who has decided to be transracial versus what the actual word meant. But again, as an Asian and a Korean adoptee or Asian adoptee, I grew up with parents who did not look like me, who did not share the same culture of origin as me, but still were looking out for, they had been told one narrative by the adoption agencies, by, the culture of privilege, the culture of power. And then I came into the mix, and I started looking for people who looked like me, people who thought like me. And what I found, and, in the beginning, it was like looking for like, oh, you're Asian. Hi, and smiling and just being like, what's up? And then finding that there's many, many very different voices and different opinions, different experiences. I started off when we were called Oriental, that's how, I guess I'm marking how old I am. And then it changed from being Asian American to Asian-American. And now we have AAPI, which is more inclusive of all the different Asian cultures, and looking at the different generations of when people's families came to this country as well, and the different perspectives based on that. I think over the years, I will say this, I have gotten into entertainment as a kid. I wanted to see people who looked like me on television. And I didn't want it to just be Connie Chung, as much as I love her. Again, that's how old I am. But having people saying, oh, you look so much like Connie Chung. And I was like, we don't look alike. We both are okay looking. There's nothing wrong. Like, I wouldn't be sad if I looked like her, but you're only saying that because there's only one Asian face that you can, you know, that you're able, you know, trying to fit me into this box. And then it became, oh, you look like Lucy Liu, and I don't look like Lucy Liu either, and that's fine. And going to different conferences. So then I was like, okay, I got to find where I belong. I got to find other people who are like me. And I need to do my research here and see, like, are you finding the same thing? And people saying we are not being represented in mainstream American media. And if we are being represented, whether it be, I'm trying to think, like Hannah Montana's friend, I think like on the Disney Channel, there was always that one token Asian, or Lucy Liu. And I look at Anna May Wong as well from back in the day with silent movies, and why she eventually left Hollywood too. And she was, you know, she was dealing with miscegenation laws, discrimination, stereotypes. She always had to play the dragon lady, or, you know, the Suki character. And it was never a positive light that Asian Americans and Asian people were being portrayed. So really looking for the different narratives and saying, how do we want to represent ourselves, and pushing the power of own voice, saying that there's many voices. A lot of people would be like, oh, what's it like being adopted? And I said, I don't know, like, there's so many different experiences. What's it like to not be adopted? I don't, like, you can't speak for everyone. And I would tell people, I can only talk about my experience, you know, and I can talk about other people's a bit who've told me their stories, but they are not the same. Some of us had good experiences. Some of us had bad experiences. Some of us, meh. Some of us still haven't processed that yet. And then finding our way into other Asian communities and seeing if we were being accepted or rejected, or being told by other people, you're not Asian enough, or you're a bad Asian, or and I figure we're all friends here, and I'm going to use terms like Twinkie or banana, and these are derogatory terms, you know, that are used. And it's like, again, in our own communities, we might laugh about it a bit. However, we do have to remember where those narratives and terms came from. And it was not from us. It did not originate with us at all. So that's sort of what I like to do, and hear other people's, you know, either validate that or be like, oh man, I had no idea. I grew up thinking I was white. And I hear that from the Asian adoptee community. I'm white. What are you talking about? I look like my family. And I'm like, okay, that's not for me to tell you you don't, or what I think of you. That's on you. But what I do hear more and more of, especially the adopted community, but other Asian, you know, people walking by the mirror one day, and it's like, I mean, you see yourself every single day in the mirror, but then one day you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, dang. Oh, I see what other people see. And having a lot of different feelings about that. Oh, crap. I'm Asian. Oh no, what do I do? You know, and it's like, but I always thought I was this, or I was trying to be that, or I was trying to be a good, you know, either a good Asian or a bad Asian, or going against the Asian stereotype, or, you know, and it's so complex. And there's a lot of room for more stories to be told, as opposed to putting us into these very tiny, simple boxes. We're complex, you know, we're beautiful, we're strong, we're funny. We emote well. That was something that was always, you know, said to a lot of Asians, why we would not get hired on TV. Y'all don't emote. Your faces don't emote. Really? Like, y'all just need to get the lighting on me nice, you know. Y'all need to just figure it out, because there's nothing wrong with me. So those are the stories. And that's a little bit about what I guess I've heard over all these years and decades. And how that's starting to change.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know you made some comments, you know, well, you're white, or well, you're not Asian. And I experienced that being biracial. Oh, well, you're not really black, or you don't act black. What the hell does that mean? And then having to unpack that and really trying to figure out who I am in this world. I'm just me. I'm Monai, you're Marieke and Krystyl, and all beautiful human beings, and they all have their own stories. So thank you so much for sharing that, Marieke. I really do appreciate that. I do want to go into a little bit because it's going to prompt more of our next discussion in regards to mental health, is that pressure of perfectionism. You said good Asian and bad Asian. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yes, and I have never been mistaken for a smart Asian. I will say that isn't, haha, but also not funny. But and I have never been cast as an Asian person. I have made my career in Irish music and dance. I've made it in this country. No. But the irony in that, or people saying because of the makeup that I wear or how I dress or how I talk, or, if I dye my hair, and they'll say, are you doing that because, are you ashamed of being Asian? And it's like, no, I was bored one day and I might have gotten into the box of dye. Sorry. I might be having regrets in a month, but it's not because of that I don't like to look Asian. Like, what kind of question is that? But these are the things that people will ask, or they'll say, it's crazy. And it's just like, at the end of the day, it's like, yes, I am me, but I also want that people will recognize that I am a person of color. I am a woman. These are the differences, and they are important to recognize. You can't just tell in our community, being perfect and saying that you're going, and I think we've seen this with what happened in Atlanta. It doesn't matter what your grades are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how long your family been in this country, or the fact that they built the railroads and they built this country. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if there is somebody, and I will say that our former administration, saying that Asian is dirty, Asian, making jokes about the Kung flu, all that stuff, that we eat dogs and cats. It takes away, and it hurts our community. And it takes away from the fact that we have worked hard, and our accomplishments should speak for themselves. It's not put down to anybody else. It's not to elevate ourselves, the model minority myth, all of that. That wasn't started by us. That wasn't started by people who are allies of the Asian community. That is a narrative of white supremacists talking, who does not want us here. And we have to remember that. And we have to remember in our own community that we do need to speak up. We do need to push for more visibility. Again, that's why I went into entertainment. So I could use that platform for other people who look like me, or other people who had similar experiences, to be able to talk about it, or say, oh, okay, my experience has been validated. I've been validated because there's somebody out there who's doing the same thing that I want to do. Again, we do get good grades, a lot of us, and a lot of us don't. And I think that's something that we see in the universities, where there is a huge push, particularly with international students. Over the years, our universities have priced out most domestic students. Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter, class-wise, most of America cannot afford these universities. So we've gone over with international students. So you do see an influx of, again, a lot of East Asian students coming into the universities. But what we don't see is that we have other Asian minority groups who are not making it, who have the same crime rates, poverty rates, dropout rates that you're going to see in the poor neighborhoods and in the poor school districts. And they're being completely erased, and say, oh, well, all Asians are this. That's not true. And we do need to support our brothers and sisters in the Asian community who are struggling, because they are not getting opportunities to go to these top universities at all. So we do need to talk about that. And to say it's okay. Like, I've had friends where people think, oh, you're Asian, so you're automatically good at math and science. Well, let's unpack that a little bit. Some of us are better at that because our parents didn't speak English. Math is math. You either get the right answer or you don't. Science, back in the day, used to be based on fact. I mean, it is still based on facts, but that makes it easier in some ways. for us to enter those fields, depending again where our families came from when they entered the country, if English is going to be a barrier. But it's not necessarily true. That doesn't, not every Asian's good at math and science. And we want to encourage people to go into the arts, to become writers, to become performers, to become musicians, all the different aspects, because we have such wonderful, rich cultures to celebrate. And we need these people to start putting that out there in America and by us, for us, own voice, as opposed to other people coming in and telling us what they, picking and choosing what they want from our cultures. But there is a lot of pressure too. I mean, that is something, and I think we talked about a bit in the universities. And this is what I have seen over the course of the pandemic. And I have gone in, I've been with Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, working on programs that would help kids in the community as well as their own, university students. And talking about the challenges with these young people with mental health. And a lot of it, and this isn't just those two schools, this is every university, are having problems where they are not fully equipped to deal with the mental health issues and challenges that their student bodies deal with. They have international students who don't have counselors who look like them or speak the same language or would understand what it's like to be in a foreign country in the middle of a pandemic, or in a foreign country away from home for the first time and being incredibly lonely or confused or missing the food or just missing everything about their old life, and dealing with other students again who might be on, let's say, their parents' insurance. They might have limited amounts of counseling sessions that they can have for free at the university, let's say. But once those sessions are done, these students are then dependent on their parents allowing them to go in and be able to continue those therapy sessions. And for a lot of the students that I've talked to, and particularly the Asian American group, they're not able to do that. They're not comfortable having that conversation with their parents.
No, absolutely. And I think you bring in a good point, and I want Krystyl to comment a little bit on that. In regards to access, I know you shared some stories with us, Krystyl, in regards to your practice and how you transitioned because of the lack of access for mental health. Can you chat about that a little bit, and then more so how it relates to different communities, especially communities with people of color?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Marieke. I was just enlightened by everything that you shared, so I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So one of the things in terms of access and opportunities, we're really talking about almost like redlining of the mental health system. And so where I actually started out doing community work, working for many nonprofits, providing therapy services, and also working for school districts here in Los Angeles and the surrounding areas. And one of the biggest things is that many of the children that I was servicing were actually, again, on their parents' insurance, but they were working families. And so many of the programs and the foundations within the school system are actually geared towards nonprofits, but specifically around Medi-Cal. Mm-hmm. And so many of the MOUs, the memorandums of understanding with these school districts, are for nonprofit servicing students who have Medi-Cal. And so in the event that the child is not, or the family doesn't have Medi-Cal insurance, or even indigent, meaning immigrants are often serviced under this limited programming, then those children cannot have access to the mental health services provided by that particular foundation or organization. Mm-hmm. And so then now you're talking about privatized mental health, meaning being able to pay for your therapy services, and those prices range between $100 on up if you're looking for a specialty, even sometimes $400, $500, depending if there is a psychiatrist needing to be involved. So I'm like, okay, how do you navigate this system without feeling like you're a part of the problem? Mm-hmm. And so that is just kind of something where I started to kind of become unaligned, because I started to see the different treatment given to individuals living in this redlining communities, not having the same access and opportunities as other individuals who may have access and opportunities and the financial means to pay for these specialty services. So I ventured out that big leap, and so started doing my private practice. And then obviously the risk and benefit there is that I don't get to service the people who look like me. So I'm like, okay, which I already knew that, but that is a risk as an individual that I had to take. But figuring out how can I navigate the system to the best of my ability. And so one of the things I started to think kind of creatively and strategically is how can I do what I do very well, and how can I still give back to the communities that are important to me. So being a clinical psychotherapist and also an entrepreneur, I'm like, okay, I can make candles and I sell my candles, and a percentage of those sales goes towards that student receiving private mental health services. So I use a host of my colleagues who I pay them their rates based on the sales of that candle, and then that student will receive mental health services. And obviously, I would have to be selling a lot of candles, right? So that's definitely in my mind. But in terms of access and opportunities, that is one of the things that I feel like are some of the predictors that I think are hindering a lot of our communities from accessing therapy services in the system that's kind of created in a way to limit those challenges.
Yes. No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Krystyl. We actually have a comment. What are ways people can help destigmatize mental health?
I mean, part of it, I'm going to say that, you know, if a university is able to pay and fully fund full service security and police, not just security, but police on their campus, and many of these universities do, and we know why. We know that it helps keep the numbers down. It helps with the prestige of the university and hide some of the things that they don't want seen. It's also a positive thing on campus that they might be more vigilant of students walking around. However, if you are a university and you are doing that and you do not have a fully funded counseling section or department, y'all need to get on top of that. Because how dare you that you would be hiding some of the issues that the police are dealing with, like suicides and assaults, and you're using them to, again, hide these problems when you could be proactive in the front end and get counselors, get their like licensed therapists who are diverse, who are compassionate, and who have the time to work with these students who at some of these universities are under extreme duress, whether it's financial duress or because of achievement, like you touched on, Monai, with that perfectionism and perfectionism being synonymous with approval and love, you know, where it's conditional, that you need to have these spaces for kids to go to first on their own. And then as we start talking in these spaces, saying, oh yeah, I'm going and seeing this counselor, oh, I'm going to services, that we can start talking about it in our communities and be like, okay, this is a trend now. We could TikTok about this, and make it with young, but also make it like there's nothing wrong with you. You are being responsible. But that comes from the ground up, from what I see with at least the universities being able to have a huge part in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And from an individual standpoint, I think it's really important for those who are practicing their mental health, they have regular therapy appointments or know what from therapy, they know they have their box of tools for their garden, and utilizing that in their workplaces, in their community and spaces, so others who are going through trauma or going through therapy know that it's okay. By having conversations, you know, it opens up the possibilities. Krystyl, can you talk a little bit more in regard from like an individual and corporate standpoint? What are things that we can do to help destigmatize mental health?
Yeah, I was thinking about this maybe like a couple years ago, just a year or two ago, when I was working for a school district. I was the only district social worker for 18 schools. So, and also many, even kind of what Marieke was saying about where the universities, I think even where they're positioning these counseling services are essential, particularly sometimes they're way off in the annex. way somewhere in the dungeon, far away from the commercialized part of the university, and it actually needs to be in the forefront. I even think of a rebranding of mental health, where you're really talking about wellness and really speaking to the health of the mind versus the unhealthy mind. I think even how we dialogue with our friends and our families, much of like our language between ourselves, we're constantly saying, oh, that person's bipolar, or that person's is schizophrenic, just in common language by maybe what that person is presenting with or how they're acting. I think even with our language within ourselves, I think will help destigmatize mental health, and even holding your corporations accountable and asking them specific, not necessarily what is the healthcare plan, but what is the mental health plan that you have currently. Many corporations don't offer sick leave for going to your therapy session. That's considered your time. What if your corporation changes their scope in terms of, well, you know what, I would prefer you to take your therapy session for, your 15 minutes or what, your hour or whatever you need to go do that, because I'm wondering from a corporation standpoint, would that increase productivity? Would that increase a better well-being within this environment? So I think that's one way to destigmatize. Another way to destigmatize mental health is really asking your employer, what are they doing to increase the well-being of the staff, and not just from a happiness scale. I think typically, like, are you happy? I think all of us can agree. We've seen that kind of questionnaire from our employers, like, are you happy? Are we doing a good job? And I think happiness, kind of what we'll probably talk about later in the show, happiness and joy are two different things. Happiness is that external experience versus joy is an internal experience of being spiritually aligned with the work that you're doing. And do you feel pleased with the work that you're doing every day? So I think that's I feel like one of the ways we can destigmatize mental health within our workplace, and also within the language between ourselves.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, that's a great point. Go ahead, Marieke.
Being mindful to the language of like, oh, that person, they're crazy.
Yeah.
They so extra. They so not, but it's like they're crazy, or they're this or they're that. And then it's not really good, because you might be, but there's nothing wrong with that. And you have a responsibility to yourself to get yourself help, and to know that no one's perfect. We all have those moments, but we shouldn't be stigmatizing and like kind of using them as the butt of the joke.
Yeah, definitely.
That he.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so schizo today. It's that like being mindful of where these terms came from.
Right. And even to add to your point, I even think of like even us like being healers, or even kind of being parts of our families and our communities. I know we have that one friend who is constantly calling us about their concerns and their feelings, and us really having our own healthy boundaries, and kind of knowing when we're out of our scope of practice, and when maybe seeking out a licensed professional to help support them throughout the way. I think sometimes as individuals, another form of destigmatization is we take too much on ourselves, and we really may not have the capacity to be there for the loved ones and friends and family as well. And kind of like, hey, I think you're better off talking with someone who can really dig deep and really help you, provide you with a psychoeducation as to what is the source of your symptoms, versus us only looking at the surface of some of our symptomology and our behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And even, ask a person, if somebody says, I'm so upset this happened, blah, 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 and just to say, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, like the same thing happened to me, as opposed to jumping in and inserting your narrative. Yeah. I had a friend come and she was real upset about stuff. And I said, tell me what that was like for you growing up. Something as simple as that. Tell me more. Yeah. What was that like? Mm-hmm. What was it like to grow up in that situation? And then the floodgates just opened, and it was like, oh, thank you so much for thank you for trusting me with that personal story, and again, it's like, this can't happen every single day. It doesn't need to, but allowing that, but you find it happening less when you do allow the person to speak their truth and to speak what they experience, as opposed to being like, oh my gosh, I had the same thing happen to me, because then they're going to keep coming back, but this, let people talk, you know, give people their spaces. And in the workspace too, just asking, I do look between the lines, you know, looking at job postings as opposed to just asking, because everyone, you know, legally they have to say, oh, well, we do this, this, and this, and we believe it.
Right.
Lines on, are they giving, what kind of, you know, bereavement leave are they giving? What are they giving with family emergency time or paternity, you know, new fathers being able to get off, and looking at that kind of stuff as well to see what the workplace is like, and then just seeing the demeanor of people.
Yeah.
What makes you get out of bed in the morning? What was something that you were proud of? Do you feel like you were heard? Or do you feel like you're just a cog in the machine? I mean,
yeah, no, and that's a great point, and something I've learned in the last few years of my life. I'm not shy. I've been to a therapist. I've been for situations, and then I've also ongoing to practice self-care and exercise my mental health. It's a muscle and something you have to work on consistently. And sometimes you need it more than others. But I've had to argue my points. I've had to then outright lie to employers and say that, hey, I'm sick, physically sick, because mentally I needed to take a break. And I wasn't in a good place. Or when I am communicating to a leader, just stating that, hey, look, like, I need to go to therapy. I need that. And so many people have tried to do that, and it's seen as a weakness, like, oh, what's wrong with you? And it's not that. It's, I'm trying to make sure that I'm taken care of so I can be the best person and out in this world and with the people that I'm interacting with. And especially when you're front facing with other individuals, you want to make sure that your mental health and that you are right. And that's where, like, self-care, it makes me so happy to hear somebody talk about self-care or boundaries. It's huge. I know at times I'm really good at boundaries and at other times I'm not. I practice consistently. But I think you brought up a great point, Krystyl. You know, friends and family come and lean on you, and that's okay. But there is a certain extent where you have some accountability. If somebody is coming to you with a lot, you know, at some point, I think you need to talk to that person and say, hey, look, like, introduce them to the idea of going to seeing somebody else, to helping really unpack what's going on. So as you say, Krystyl, get them to the life that you deserve. And I've had those conversations with friends who just kept coming back and saying, like, everything's okay. I'm happy to listen, but it truly is just listening. I'm not equipped. I can give you my opinion, but I'm not equipped to give you the really important help that you need.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, and kind of what we were talking about in our pre-production meeting, just really about the like the generational trauma, right? We often become a catalyst of the stories of our ancestors, of our family, of our friends. And so it's really about how do we formulate healthy boundaries to really stop those generational curses. And just one way of that is just really just about having healthy communicative boundaries with them. And so one of the biggest things is people feel like those healthy boundaries are like, cut them off, I don't want to hear it. But the healthy boundaries is not for the other person to follow. You know, the healthy boundaries being communicated are really for the individual who's communicating that boundary outward. And so I think sometimes healthy boundaries I think it has a misconception, like, oh, they won't listen, like, that's just my mom, that's just how she is, or that's my dad, or, you know, my sibling, or my partner, or my husband or wife. And it really is not for the other person. It's really for you to follow and become alignment with your own values in terms of how much you can really take on from other people, and really identifying what's your emotional intensity for being able to handle other people's stories and things that they've experienced if you don't have the capacity to hold on to it, which I think we'll probably talk about at some point.
No, I mean, like, you brought it up. Let's dive in a little bit more.
Let's do it. Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I see, which is probably why it became more of a behaviorist versus more psychodynamic, and just psychodynamic is just like looking at your birth history on up to presently your age and your development. But I really became a behaviorist because I realized that trauma is inevitable. And that difficult situations are inevitable. And it's like, okay, once you tell your story and your experience, now what are you gonna do? Mm-hmm. And so I use this kind of thing in my private practice as well as with other like companies and corporations, like asking yourself, what is your emotional intensity? And so what that does is that it gives you validation of your emotion, but it helps you kind of configure, is my intensity of my emotion too high or too low for this situation? And does my emotion fit the facts of this situation? And so an example of that could be, you know, having a feeling of anger. And is my anger intensity between a 7 and a 10? And so that just basically means that you're outside of your window of tolerance and you don't have the capacity to give to anyone else, and you only have the capacity to give to yourself. So doing some type of behavioral activation around self-soothing, doing something that's meaningful and joyful for yourself that calms you down so that you can be in a position to problem solve and communicate with other people around you.
Yeah. Well, and yeah. I know I've been in spaces where I've learned that sometimes I have to even just remove myself. I have, you know, for me, the way my activation works, I have to process. There's a certain amount of time. I need to fully understand what happened and dissect that a little bit so that I can respond and find a solution. And I think people need to understand that everybody's different. And I know I've been in situations, especially in the workplace, where people have demanded a response in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I've had to learn how to articulate, hey, I need to process this. I have several emotions around this. I need to process this, and then let me get back to you. Let's schedule a meeting tomorrow or time sometime this week. So first off, I don't do or say anything that I get into trouble for. But I want to be able to communicate effectively. And so for me, there's a process in that, and that's okay. And then the other part to that is that there's this understanding that what works for me doesn't work for you, and for you, everything's different. So there's a little bit of empathy there as well. Like have the benefit of the doubt. And if you don't, I've had to remove myself from a situation. I've walked out of meetings before. I'm not saying that's your first step, but if it's in a toxic environment, if it's in a toxic environment and it doesn't serve the purpose and why you started to meet, sometimes you do need to walk away, because then people realize, oh, there's something going on, there's something bigger, and that's the catalyst to have another conversation.
Yeah. It's been so hard, like in the schools where it's like, and I see again in, I know in Florida they have the Baker laws, where you might be given, if you're lucky, 72 hours to figure it out. And it's like you have kids who are extremely vulnerable, who are hurting, and they're being told you have X amount of time before you're kicked out of this, you know, intake process or this place, a safe space. Mm-hmm. And then you're looking at spending $3,000 a day upwards of being in a facility. If you need to have additional help, whatever the case may be, schools, it's the same thing. We're like, we need an answer now. Yeah. We need you to achieve. You're hurting our bottom line. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I just need a couple hours. Can I have that space? You know, and it's like, we need an answer now. And it's like, I can't always do that. You know, that is something that our whole system needs to change, whether it's the school systems. And I know people are asking what the Baker law is. That's if you think that a child or person is a danger to themselves or others, that you would enact the Baker law and have them protected in these, you know, places where there's counselors, group talks. It's sort of like a stepping point to possibly being put into an institution, put into an outpatient facility, that kind of stuff. So that's where the decisions are being made. But you have people in absolute crisis mode, and the families too. It's very hard to make a decision, and when you know that time is ticking. Yeah. but it is the Mental Health Act and it was enacted 1971.
Yes.
That allows for involuntary emergency examination of an individual, and we have that in schools too, where it's like, again,
We have a
but it's a very short amount of time to make a huge decision.
Well, and not just that, let's reverse that. So there's this law that's in place, and teachers can enact it, and there's the stigma even in certain cultures that what you're feeling and thinking, you keep that to yourself. There's this fear that, having someone else coming in dictating what you can and cannot do, or your rights. And I know as a child, I was always told, my mom was like, what happens at home stays at home. You don't
air your dirty laundry.
Call anybody. You don't go into that. And there was this mentality that you couldn't share what was going to happen in the personal home because there could be consequences. Families can be, separated. So there's a lot of times where individuals need help and they won't articulate that.
And that's a huge thing. And working in the school system, seeing that as a threat, especially to communities of color, to parents of color, mothers of color. I don't like how I saw you talking to your kid, or I heard this about something, your kid said this thing, and then they threatened to take the child away from the parent. And being in those situations where it's like, we don't know what's going on. We need time. We need to have other things in place. I know that some of my colleagues had emergency foster care like certification, so they could take the child overnight, so the child would not be put into the system. But if there was any, but it's just so, like, there's so many traumas and there's so many people in need of help that, again, we need to have better systems. I know a lot of teachers have told me they will not use, even though they have good health care, will not go and see a therapist because they are afraid that the school, even though it would be illegal, that the district could look and see how they use those services. And that they would be deemed unfit to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of stigma and fear and legitimate concern of even using the resources that are available.
Yeah. Or even what is it? And correct me if I'm wrong, the EPA, is that what it's called? The phone line within HR.
For your employer.
Yeah, for your employers. There's 4 to 6 sessions, depending on your employer, where you're able to get the help for free. And that's kind of checking a box that, I cover mental health. You have this program, and that's great, but you need to add to that. Crystal and I, we were having a conversation. Most of the time, just being able to dissect, it was taking 6 months to even get, comfortable forming that relationship. And I want you to talk about that a little bit more, just to lay the groundwork and the foundation, and then the sessions are over. And then you have to move on and figure out ways on how you're going to continue on this journey or get the help that you need.
And just the trauma of having to retell your story over and over and over again to a different counselor, a different therapist, different people. It can do more harm than good. And to be able to find, again, it's difficult enough to find a good professional who can help you, who you do, mesh with. And you might have to go and find multiple therapists and try different people out in the beginning. But it's like, if you find that person, it's like to have to, hurry it up and close out that sessions. That is a terrible thing to do to somebody.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of, this might sound kind of weird, hopefully it makes all sense. In some ways, there is some benefit of that from a behavioral standpoint, because once you communicate a trauma experience, you have kind of almost started the hardest part of it because you released it. And so some of the programs that are currently created are very much short-term therapy, crisis-based system. And I feel like we haven't yet created a long-term or an effective system to properly support individuals who may need more time to process their trauma experience. So to Marieka's point, it can definitely be re-traumatizing for some individuals depending on their trauma experience. And I also recognize that sometimes, almost like treating getting a therapist, almost like speed dating. You keep going until you find that one, and never really shutting the door, closing the door from actually living the life that you deserve because of one experience wasn't what you thought it would be, or you felt that therapist wasn't meeting your needs. It's like you keep going because your life is that important. So I just wanted to kind of add to that. Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that even to have these kinds of spaces with Big Break, that we have a community to share our joys too. And not just, and again, as people of color, we have a lot of historical traumas that we're dealing with. Some of us are aware of it, some of us are not, some of us are in denial still, which is, you do you. But we need to have these spaces where we can talk when we're ready. Or even just come in and listen to other people and be like, maybe I vibe with that, maybe I don't. But also then spaces to say, let's celebrate how great we are and that we've made it and that we are enough. You are enough. And I think if that's the one message I could say for people, you are enough. Come as you are. You're fine. You'll find your place. That's good. What can we do? So what, I don't know.
I mean,
you have as far as like reclaiming joys and celebrating what's wonderful about us.
Yeah, I think I love what you said, and I think that's kind of what has kind of been leading me more into my work being an entrepreneur and a practicing clinical psychotherapist, is increasing our capacity for practicing joy. And so people sometimes maybe will feel like, I've gone through so much, I've had so many losses, there's chaos all around me. Is that, yes, that is absolutely true and absolutely happening. And at the same time, the sky hasn't fell, right? And there is still, I don't even want to say hope, but I think that there's still some level of clarity where we can, all of us can practice some level of gratitude in how we may either compare ourselves to other people who may be less fortunate, even just having air in our lungs. I think even just kind of those simplistic things that people may not feel like can be joyful, but I think given the practice of really being intentional about how we practice joy, almost a practice of radical self-care, if you will. I think there's this kind of picture of what self-care has been, and it is, taking a bubble bath, a nice face mask, just kind of relaxing, go get a massage. But I think that radical self-care is really taking care of our internal mind and our spirit to be able to show up authentically by possibly speaking to your partner about possibly, a boundary that you have, and also like kind of like a digital detox, kind of what we have here on the slide, ways to increase your capacity for practicing joy. A digital detox could be just simply setting a timer of when you're going to look at your phone. I know a lot of us will hop out of bed and check emails, trying to give yourself that time to kind of really get yourself awake from sleeping almost 6 to 8 hours, and allowing yourself to kind of lay there and allow the body to recalibrate for 10 minutes. I don't know if you want me to read some of the things on this list, but even taking care of your plants, cooking your favorite meal, blowing bubbles. I can't even tell you when the last time I've seen bubbles. Probably maybe 10 years ago. But creating yourself like a self-care kit where you put like your favorite thing in a box and you go to that to give you kind of some level of peace or a way for you to increase your capacity for practicing joy, I think is going to be paramount to how you handle and deal with difficult situations that may arise that may be out of your control.
No, absolutely. And one thing is, I want to remind everybody, yes, it's easier said than done. One thing I do is I schedule it. I put it as time in my calendar because unfortunately, as a society, typically your calendar kind of dictates what your day is, right? Personally and professionally. But spending time with friends, having like a potluck dinner, that brings me so much joy. Even being able to go to an amusement park or go to a museum for a day, or just simply going to the beach. I don't even wear a bathing suit sometimes. I just go to listen to the waves and write and just be one with my environment and be there in the moment. A lot of times I'll leave my phone in the car, lock that up. So I'm really just there and just embracing that moment. And
Yeah.
it could be free, or you could spend money, you could treat yourself.
Yeah.
But
Or even holding a boundary, you know, I think sometimes we don't feel like, oh, sending that email or completing that project or cleaning a drawer out in your house. You never really know how it kind of really takes a little bit off your plate. And you may recognize it, you may not. But I think kind of tending to some of those behavioral activation things that we kind of essentially take for granted that really can give us some level of emotional peace, I think is paramount to being able to create more healing space within yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think about too, like, instead of, having to-do lists, which are very overwhelming and sometimes very depressing and counterproductive, I have a what I accomplished list. No matter how big, no matter how small. Okay, hey,
Yep.
you know what? You were able to cook yourself a dinner. Let's not talk about that it was burnt, but good for you. You learned something new. You were able to laugh at something today. Something as basic as that. Or a bigger accomplishment. Hey, I was able to get this email out, and I've been struggling with these issues, and you know what? That's a step in the right direction. And to be able to keep, inventory of that kind of stuff, and the small accomplishments as well as the big, and then connecting with people. Unplug your phone and connect with people, unless you're on Zoom, and then that's different. But that personal connection of people who get you. It's like your favorite pair of jeans. Who are you going to go home to? Who are you going to talk to? Who are you just so excited to see and tell about your day?
No, absolutely. Oh, ladies, I can't even express my gratitude enough for you all coming on today with Big Break Foundation. I love this conversation. I know we could have gone in so many different directions in our production meeting. There were so many just different topics, and so I know the conversation will continue. This isn't goodbye, but I really want to thank you all for your time today. Insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So one of the things that we're going to give you all access to, Krystyl put together a great document and a great resource in regards to capacity of joy. In addition to that, we have resources for you for Asian American Pacific Islander Month, as well as contact information in regards to organizations that support mental health from an educational and resource standpoint, suicide hotlines, and then specific hotlines for people of color or within the marginalized community. So we'll make that available to everybody on our website and also on our social media channels, so that you have all of that information and knowledge to dive in more and really understand your role and your part. It's no longer see something, say something. It's see something, do something. Hear something, do something, right? Just really excited. Themed Entertainment TV has a great lineup for the rest of this month. So definitely stay tuned for all the other episodes. And then also on May 20th, we will be celebrating Mental Health Action Day. This is in partnership with MTV. So we're really excited with that. Check it out. There is a Mental Health Action website with more details, resources as well. So looking forward to that. And then next month is Pride Month. So very excited. We'll be chatting with Barbara and Leah from One Pulse. So stay tuned for more. And as always, if you need anything, please feel free to reach out or go to our website at bigbreakfoundation.org. Any closing remarks, ladies?
Just practice joy. Be intentional.
I was going to say, just be you. It's awesome. You're awesome.
Perfect.
You got this. We got this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. Happy Wednesday, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.